Oh, wow. Okay, Jack, you outdid yourself. Hi, everybody. This is Jay Frost, the host of the Mastermind series, and your temporary ghoul. Welcome you to the series today. Um, Great choice of music. And for people who are of a certain age and grew up in the New York area, you may remember Chiller Theater. So, whether or not Jack knew it, that was an homage to the ultimate show that many of us watched back when the only way to watch horror movies or anything Halloweeny was probably on a Saturday night on a TV that only had three major networks and a couple of channels that you had to dial very far to find. So anyway, and I'm glad you're terrified already, but there's going to be more, Kathy. So keep that up. And Tony, we are going to test the ability to let people speak. I'm not sure it's going to work today. So please do use the chat as much as you can. If we can use this as radio call-in, we'll try. But if that fails, we do want to hear from you. And I've got a lot to share with you, some of which is serious. So please don't go away. Some of which is just, I think, pretty funny. And I'm sure you have a lot of good stories too. So I'm really glad to see all these people here. um, yes, I agree. Great choice of music. Happy Halloween, Jory. Uh, Everybody. I mean, I also like that reference to Silicon Valley being a pretty scary place. Yeah, there's some great stories out there for fundraising and philanthropy. That is for sure. So today I've got a lot that I'm going to share with you. And what I want to do is keep that as an open door where it already is in the chat. So you can be a part of the action and share stories. And I wish I could tell you how to do that anonymously. But I know you probably have figured that out already because people do it every single time, every single show. So give it a shot. If you have difficulty knowing how to do that, let us know in the chat, and then Jack will help you. Or, of course, you can always just communicate with not everyone, but just us, the host and the speakers. And then that way we will be the only ones seeing that it's coming from you. So this is a safe space for you to tell the big stories and spill the tea. What I'm going to do, since there are no slides today, is to just read some stories to you that I've been receiving from some of you, and also to again have this conversation with you best as I can using this device. But I'm doing all that courtesy of Hailzo, and in the Hailzo studio. I'm not going to tell you where it is because as a Twitch streamer, Hailzo of course, really values her privacy, but I hope that you'll check out her stream. You'll find something interesting, which is that among all the stories that I'm going to share with you today, there are none, at least that I've heard of so far, about Twitch streamers being in the heart of bad practice. There are a lot of great Twitch streamers out there, people on the cutting edge of philanthropy and who are doing great things, especially the kind of emerging class of people who are fundraisers and philanthropists. They aren't in our stories. They're doing pretty good work. Hailzo is one of them. So check her out. I'm going to start with a little story that goes back a few years, but I think everybody's going to recognize this guy's name. And thank you, Anna. Go ahead and keep dropping those in the chat. And that's about Jeffrey Epstein. So first of all, let's just do a reality check here. How many people recognize the name Jeffrey Epstein? Some of you, you know the whole story. Some of you don't. Yes. Okay. Of course. Yes. Well, Tony, you would. Hopefully, you've never interviewed him, Tony, but who knows? You know a lot of people. Hey there from Salt Lake. Sure. Yes. Yes. Thank you, Tracy. Thank you, Peggy. Yes. So it's a name that you might know. And thank you, Jack, for telling everybody where Hailzo streams. Check out that stream. So in case you're not aware of him, I think that he's more than a single use case for how not to do things. So I'm going to just share a little bit of that story with you in case it's been either it hasn't come across your desk or it's been lost in the memory of all the other things we have to deal with as fundraisers and people in philanthropy. So Jeffrey Epstein, I'm going to give you kind of a window on that through my own experience. He went to a place called Interlaken National Music Camp in 1967. He played bassoon, kind of an interesting, fun, weird fact. He became a donor much later, and he underwrote a lodge that bared his name, is that the correct term? Bore his name, past tense. His last gift was back in 2003. After, quote, the administration learned of his conviction in 2007, they discontinued contact and removed all donor recognition with his name. I'm not trying to point fingers at Interlochen here. They're pretty blameless in this story. Before all this was known, he hosted alumni events at his New York City townhouse. I'm going to go back to that in a second. According to Wired magazine, Harvard, which had up to that time received nearly $7 million in donations from this guy, Jeffrey Epstein, stopped accepting his support. That's convictions for, of course, a massive, massive amount of child sexual exploitation. However, he was already a, quote, visiting fellow in the psychology department and had access to an office in the university's program for evolutionary dynamics, very interesting, and held regular meetings there, often with scholars and politicians, routinely accompanied by young women, according to reports, until October of 2018, less than a year before his death in a jail cell facing new sexual abuse charges. Meanwhile, across the river over at MIT, the Media Lab's director at the time, Joichi Ito, who left in 2019 after revealing the extent of his ties to Epstein, which, quote, included investments by Epstein in 2 of Ito's personal ventures. Epstein reportedly visited MIT on at least 9 occasions between 2013 and 2017. And by the way, guess how much money MIT received for all of this swimming in the mud? Just $525,000. There's a lot of discussion in our field about whether we're doing too much for certain donors and whether they're getting the best of us or so forth, especially the major donors. Well, in this case, it wasn't even really that big of a donation that MIT was in the middle of doing all this, entertaining for. In the end, MIT announced it would donate all of its Epstein monies to a charity benefiting sexual abuse survivors. And Harvard announced that it would donate to organizations that support victims of human trafficking and sexual assault, which was left over from his donations, $201,000. And what of all the other institutions that received his donations over the years? Nothing, really, very little conversation at all. How quickly we forget about these people, the monsters that we discover, that we've often been kind of, sometimes unwittingly, usually unwittingly, cultivating relationships with. The main reason for mentioning the worst possible case scenario with Epstein is not to lambaste Harvard or MIT or even Interlochen, my beloved Interlochen, which didn't have much dealings with this guy at all. And to my knowledge, he only visited Interlochen 1 week, and there was none of this kind of terrible activity going on there. But rather, it was mainly to make sure that there was some kind of, accounting for the connections they had with people. That's the main reason for mentioning it. And whether or not they had a policy which informed what they did and when they did it and how they did it. If they had good policies in place, which were also followed by the entire team, including the leadership team, maybe these things wouldn't have occurred and Harvard and MIT wouldn't have to have answered for being involved with a guy like this. For the most part, these institutions are stellar, as we know. They do great work, they have great people, and a lot of great donors. But there's something teachable in here for us. And so that's what a lot of the stories are today. They won't be all as scary as Jeffrey Epstein. And as Tony says here, he and Madoff are infamous. Absolutely true. There are lots of other people like this too. And in fact, the other monsters I just want to reference are in the Hall of Shame that you're going to find online. It's a Charity Watch Hall of Shame, which include Father Bruce Ritter, Covenant House, William Aramone, Bill Aramone of United Way of America, John Bennett Jr., Foundation for a New Era Philanthropy. And in fact, I'll just pause there to make the case that sometimes our memory fails us even when the stories are big, before we go into some stories which are maybe a little lighter, but still have a lot to teach us. So John Bennett, how many people recognize that name? He hasn't been in the news recently, nor has Foundation for New Era Philanthropy. Anybody know what that is? Okay, so no, Peggy, and you're not alone. Don't leave Peggy on a limb there. No, Ellen, Tim. So there are a lot of people who wouldn't recognize this name anymore, sort of like Bill Aramone, which was a big one when I was coming up in fundraising. So who is this guy? Why is it important? Well, John Bennett was, again, the founder of the Foundation for New Era Philanthropy. Look it up. Which claimed that deposits by nonprofits would be matched dollar for dollar by an anonymous donor. It was all a massive Ponzi scheme. So going back to, of course, the comment earlier from Tony about Madoff, this was similar in nature. It was a massive Ponzi scheme that caused a loss of $135 million over its 5.5 years of operation. So there's a whole bunch of these folks that we don't have to say that it's saying something bad about our sector. What we can do is we can learn from these examples and then take the best practices and apply them in our institutions in a uniform manner. That's kind of the tale I hope to tell as I share some of this with you today. So, and I want to encourage you all to keep those stories coming through. I'll make sure I reference them as we get into this into these stories. One of the things I thought might be useful to do is kind of an architecture for this conversation would be to talk about some of the things that do exist in our sector already to help us out. And you may know that this is Ethics Month for AFP, the Association for Fundraising and Philanthropy. Hope you're following that. They have, in fact, a great series of little articles that I'll reference in a minute on their website right now, talking about some examples for first-person accounts, all anonymous, about how they've had some difficulty in, with donors or donor engagement or inside with staff. And some of them are more serious in nature and some are a little lighter, but all of them have something to teach us. But the main reason why they post them right now is, once again, because of Ethics Month. And I'd like to think of Ethics Month like we talk about Black History Month or many other things that are really important that we give too little time to. The reason I reference Black History Month is because Black history and Black philanthropy is occurring every day of the week, all the time. And I know that we put a spotlight on that to give it greater attention because it is often neglected. I would like to say in the same way that when it comes to ethics are something we should think about every day of the week. They're really important. And to AFP's credit, at least they put the spotlight on there for 1 month. So in that way, we can talk about these things, and not just in terms of the stories we're going to share today, but also in terms of what you can do to protect yourselves from some of the things that we can avoid. So there's a whole area within the CFRE training, for example, where they talk about ethics, accountability, and professionalism. And there are items like this. You can ensure that all fundraising activities and policies comply with ethical principles and legal standards to reflect the values of the organization and the community. You can communicate principles of ethical fundraising to stakeholders. Communication comes up again and again. To promote ethical practices and strengthen a culture of philanthropy. Promote ethical fundraising as a crucial component of philanthropy to strengthen the sector, not just your own organization, and support the sector's role as a pillar of civil society, and on and on. But much of it, when it boils right down to the root of what this is all about, is this matter of making sure that we're being clear, communicating, that we have policies that undergird our work, and that we're very transparent about what we do and how we do it. So how does that relate to what we're going to talk about today? There are some ethical guidelines within the Code of Ethical Standards at AFP, the Donor Bill of Rights, and also one over at our friends at a sister organization, which I care for a great deal, APRA. APRA is the association that really focuses on research and prospect development. That they also have a code of ethics, which is adjacent to and complementary to the one at AFP. And if we can look at those two for a few minutes and then see what they talk about in there, we might be able to find a way of linking the stories that I'm going to share with you and that you'll be sharing with me to some of the things that we can learn and apply every day in our work. So with that, I'm going to share a few of the things that come from maybe the code that's a little less well-known to many of us in the APRA Code of Ethics, and then use that as the architecture for telling a few of these stories. The first, so the APRA Code of Ethics consists of, 6 items: confidentiality, accuracy, relevance, responsibility, or as they described it, self-responsibility, honesty, and conflict of interest. So an awareness of each of these things and the application of these principles in the work of research or prospect development. which once again is a foundational bedrock of everything we do. We want to make sure we collect information on our donors, but we don't want to do it in a responsible way. We want to make sure that the information is accurate. We want to make sure it's relevant, that we are responsible in the collection and distribution of that information, that we are honest in what we do, and that we avoid conflicts of interest, very much like the rest of fundraising and philanthropy. So some of those things are really funny in a way when we violate them. Sometimes it's serious, sometimes it's a little lighter. So I'm going to share some of the stories finally now with you. And I'm going to start with one or a series of them about accuracy. So that's a big area for folks in research and prospect development, but I'd like to think it's something that's important to everybody in our sector, no matter what you do. And so I have a few stories here, and I want you to tell me which one you'd like to hear either first, or maybe I just do a couple of these. So these are stories I've collected over the last, oh my gosh, 15, 20 years. Some are as recent as today. Some are as old as 20 years ago. We're getting good notes here about that AFP, thank you for this, is working on an update to the Code of Ethics. And it's important because that will show, of course, to all of us that the things I'm talking about today are not static, but instead they can be reviewed and should be reviewed periodically. And it's being reviewed right now. So keep in touch with your chapter leaders. Keep thinking about the subject. Keep bringing it back to your staff. Keep being part of the conversation. So first, let's look at accuracy, or at least use that as a vehicle to talk about a couple of these stories. So I have a few stories with some titles on them. You tell me which one you'd like to hear first. Howling Good Time, Life on the Farm, Franken Trustee, Father and Son, or You, Your Wife, and Your Other Wife. You pick. The last one, the wife. Okay. I don't know if it's just because it's the last one. Okay, I'll start with that one. All right. Now you're going to have to bear with me because it's a lot of stories. All right. And again, these are first-person accounts. They're from people who have sent them to me. So I'm reading from their account. These are not my words, not my experience. You, Your Wife, and Your Other Wife. A place I used to work at was set to deliver a named endowment proposal to a major donor. The major gifts officer gave the information to the staff to prepare the document and mock up a plaque. Unfortunately, neither the major gift officer nor the staff double-checked the names. They went off the major gift officer's personal address file, and the information was old. So the proposal had the major donor's former wife's name, and they had just ended a very messy divorce. But the good news was that the proposal was delivered in person, not to the former wife's house. And the major donor calmly pointed out the error and agreed to the endowment with a name change to the current wife. And then they delivered the gift basket. And guess what it had on it? The former wife's name. Okay. So that one, yeah, a little crazy, but not uncommon. So let me see. Yes, yikes is right. All right. So now I think somebody mentioned life on the farm. So I'm going to read that one to you. My boss approached me one day to tell me that one of our governors had read a research report in which I wrote about a prospect's sexual activities. Dumbfounded, I said there was no way I'd ever write about something like that. I immediately went to my research file. This is back when researchers had files, yes, not just everything being digital, accessible to all. I went back to my research files to see what I had written, and on my report, which was about a retired couple, I wrote that they enjoyed loving on their farm. I meant to type they enjoyed living on their farm. You can imagine my red face, obviously, blah, 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 blah. Yes. Okay, so, and where's Franken Trustee? Oh, Franken Trustee. Franken Trustee has disappeared. I guess he must be up there for a reboot of the Lightning. So I'll give you Howling Good Time quickly. In 1985, I told you some of these were old. And this was a story given to me probably 15 years after. In 1985, I fielded a phone call from the president's secretary obviously university or likely, who had just finished talking with the wife of a new trustee. The trustee's wife called regarding invitations to events they were receiving from the president's office. She expressed an interest in attending the events, but had to ask, was the university really serious about extending the invitation to the trustee and to Molly, the family's German Shepherd? The entire family wanted to be there for the first black tie event that Molly was going to attend. And what happened, of course, was that the DOD had had lunch with the new trustee and then informed the research staff that the name of the family's, of the trustee's spouse was, in fact, he conflated them, was the name of the dog. So they had a lot of fun with the Freudian slip in the office. Research accepted the information from the DOD without doing any fact checking. And when I fielded the call, back in the story, when I fielded the call, I was just about finished editing the new trustee directory, which included the names of spouses and one dog named Molly. Imagine the fallout from a horror story of this nature. But several years later, they named a chair in honor of Molly and in memory of the secretary of the board of trustees. So there can be a good outcome for these things. So that's just a little bit of fun on the accuracy side. It doesn't always seem that relevant or important, but it can be pretty dire. This is about relevance. That's something that I mentioned to you a few minutes ago about relevance. And it's one of the hallmarks of APRA's traditional code of ethics. They're probably doing what AFP did, which is to always reevaluate. But relevance is important, and we know that a lot now. And what we think is relevant may be changing with time. So here are a few of what were described as blackout tales. I'm still blacking out, like literally blacking out, comments made in files by a former VP who would write notes in the margins of call reports, calling donors things, well, like this. And these are all quotes. Jane confided in me that she's having her will rewritten now to eliminate her niece and nephew from her will. She explained that their two sons don't get along, so her will says if they can't divide the estate equitably between them, the entire estate will be left to University X. Alan said Tim should not be contacted as he is not well. Charlie added he was corrupted by all the money, didn't handle the stress well of playing second fiddle to his brother, and is paranoid, and they think he lives in Monaco. And then this one. I relayed a personal story to her about my father's remarriage at the age of 82 when he's in poor health and commented that at least she didn't have a situation like that. If that's not irrelevant, I don't know what is. So does any of this stuff resonate for you? I hope you don't find this kind of stuff in your files. It can be scary. But again, it's all real. Now, responsibility, that seems pretty straightforward, right? This isn't a matter of just have we put it down right or do we put down the right thing? This is really pretty broad in terms of what are our responsibilities, each of our individual roles within our office, within the organization, our responsibility to one another, to our donors, to the public, because we are, if you're in a nonprofit, you're representing a public good. It's not owned by the people who either founded or run the organization. It's owned by the public. So we have a lot of responsibilities in here. It's hard to boil them all down, but here are a few stories that some people shared where they thought that the responsibilities maybe they weren't really being carried out precisely. So I'm going to read you a few titles and you tell me again where we should start. Let me see. No boundaries. Can you help me with my book? Oops, wrong room. Just in case you run out of napkins. And how much do you guys make? Okay, we've got wrong room and napkins. Wrong room. All right. All right. Well, I'm going to go with wrong room first. And so we'll start there. Sometimes these stories disappear on me. Oh, wow. They have all disappeared on me. Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay, so I have no boundaries. Can you help me with my book? Just the facts, ma'am. And how much do you guys make? Sorry about that. I am. I'm teasing, but not intentionally. So I'll go with boundaries and then facts. Be more careful in the future. I'm not exercising my own responsibility to you right now. So we'll start with once again with which one? How much do you guys make? I guess. And these are all first person. I was researching a woman who was an attorney at Sears, and I was trying to estimate her income. This is something a lot of our organizations do, right? For better or worse. I checked salary surveys, but they only had top corporate attorneys, while Sears, when Sears was a thing, while Sears had about 30 on staff. So I posted a message on the listserv, probably Prospectel, asking if anyone knew the salary ranges for corporate attorneys at big companies like Sears. I was stunned when I got a call the next day from the top corporate attorney at Sears asking why I wanted to know the salaries of their attorneys. I stammered something in return and was shaking like a leaf. I should have known better. The lesson learned: I will never use the name of companies on the L, and especially names of individuals. You never know who's monitoring them or searching for their name. You may all note that I have just read a story with the word Sears in it. Who's at fault here? I'm not sure, but Sears, I'm just reading a story. It's not mine. And these are things I've experienced too, and maybe you have, where something which is public information, still when it's discussed in public, it can cause an adverse reaction. Yes, Sears is long gone, but there are still some Sears people out there. There may be a Sears catalog in somebody's house right now, probably your grandparents' house, but there we go. All right, just the facts, ma'am. The director of development traveled to Texas to attend a national board meeting. She found out she'd be spending some time with one of the board members, so called back to the office. A lot of phone calls, old story. So called back to the office and asked for the profile to be faxed to her at the hotel. So obviously a 20th century activity. Her assistant did that, but somehow the cover sheet was separated from the profile sheet, and the desk clerk only saw the profile. Desk clerk thought that the fax was addressed to the title name on the profile, the board member, and delivered the profile to the board member. Needless to say, the board member said, "What, is this?" But they were savvy enough to figure out where it came from and confronted the director of development. Fortunately, all the info was public information except for the giving history, but it still required some smoothing over. So my cautionary tale to all researchers and assistants, again, this person, is never fax any profiles anywhere, anytime. Not much danger of that now, but there are dangers of how we present information to others and whether or not they know whether or not that information may be shared, since even dealing with public information, that can be an issue. So anyway, we've got a bunch of these kind of things. I'm going to move on a little bit so we have time for your stories too. So keep those coming, okay? Promise to go back. Another area that's important to not just researchers, but a lot of others, it's just that researchers initially were the best at delivering all these stories. We're starting to see that turn around a little bit. So there's a little bit more openness in discussing these issues now among the entire philanthropic community, but it still takes a little work to get those stories out there. But here are a few in the conflict of interest column. Take my clients, please. Sharing the wealth. And we're all part of the same institution, aren't we? And they're all short, so I'll just give them all to you. Take my clients, please. While at University X, one of our key volunteers who was a partner at, and once again, I'm just reading what they wrote, who was a partner at Goldman Sachs, gave me a large binder of all the Goldman Sachs clients and their assets. While it was a gold mine of information, I love this. While it was a gold mine of information, it was a breach of confidentiality, and it was just handed right back to him. There are a lot of times when we're presented with information that really isn't relevant, isn't appropriate, or where someone else is engaged in a conflict, and we can do what this person did. That's why I love that story. Here's another brief one. Sharing the wealth. A trustee on the nominating committee of the university gave the university's confidential binder of potential trustees to another organization where he sat on the board. Now, whether that's the old days of print and binders or not, That is the kind of issue that we always have to talk about. Also, is what is the policy? Does everyone know what that policy is? And are they observing and honoring that policy? And then we're all part of the same institution, aren't we? I like this story because it talks a little bit about the arts. We don't get enough of those. I work for an arts organization that's on a university campus, and we and the university share many of the same board members. You can already see potential issues here, right? One board member who does a lot of fundraising for us took the profiles I prepared on her prospects and gave them to the university administrators, who promptly called her prospects to verify the information and told where they got the info. Needless to say, we had a, quote, come to Jesus meeting with our board solicitors. So never assume that they know the profiles are confidential, even if it says that at the top of the profile, much less the fact that we need to be very quiet in our community, that we even collect what is considered personal information. Once again, it's just a matter of as much communication as policy and making sure there's uniformity. I'm loving the comments here too, so thank you for that. And I have to make sure that I know which are coming to me and which are coming to everyone. So yes, from Iska, you had a friend who was a GO and took a profile with her in her purse, and the donor saw it and asked you to see it. I mean, this kind of stuff, we really do have to be careful. Even in the age of digital, because it's accessible too. I mean, depending upon how people are utilizing what they've got and how they can see it. It's having a good policy for the use of data is very, very, very important. And I absolutely agree, Anna. I think it really crosses the line sharing that kind of confidential info. So what's another area that comes up a lot? These are some recent stories on the special events front. Really not a lot that has to do with kind of the direct solicitation or research or philanthropy piece, but events are such a piece of our life. It's nice to see something once in a while that's a little bit funny. I read a lot of stories just recently along these lines, all in the last few years, which involved someone dying. And it was, I mean, dying at the event or falling off a stage or collapsing and then needing an ambulance to take them out. And they weren't particularly funny, so I'm not going to read them here. But I think one thing I did learn from those is you do need some kind of game plan in case someone gets hurt, injured, or passes at an event, not just because of the event, my gosh, no, but because you care about the people who are there. So if that's not a part of your planning, it may seem outside the realm of this kind of horror stories and ethics theme, but I did learn something myself from that because I'm not an events guy. And one thing I definitely heard is if you care for people that much that we're thinking about them in advance, it does also benefit our bottom line. But far more importantly, it just is the right thing to do. It's a way of taking care of the people who care about us. Anyway, these stories are not like that. So the first one I have borrowed from, let's see, I'm going to cite this the source first because it's not anonymous. It's from Jessica Cloud, a CFRE, who posted to LinkedIn on boy, my gosh, just recently. And this is from her real life fundraising horror stories. And I just love this one. So I want to make sure to give credit. And I'm just reading directly from what she shared on LinkedIn. It's a great story. And it's called The Worst Meat Pies in Mississippi. I'm sorry, I just read Mitchell, you thought I was wearing a penguin Halloween costume, but it's just the outline of my chair. Well, yes. Although maybe some people say I look like a penguin. Jack, you'll have to tell me if that's true. I'm not sure. But anyway. So, okay. Yes, Michelle, you're already onto it. So don't tip everybody else off yet. I remember the meeting clearly. We were planning our lifetime donor club gala event. It was our first big event after an EF4 tornado tore through our campus. There was a great story with our School of Music because they had been rehearsing the musical for that year, Sweeney Todd, when the storm hit their building. The students and faculty were lucky to survive, but the show went on to become a smash hit. Stephen Sondheim actually sent a gift with a handwritten note. It's a great story. So my VP announces that the cast will be performing numbers in the show at the gala. I raised my hand. Do you all know what Sweeney Todd is about? Sure, it's about a crazy barber. No, no, no. It's about cannibalism. Pulls up the song, Worst Meat Pies in London, and a little priest and I play them on the piano. Oh, surely they won't select those. I cross my arms and I say, we'll see. The night of the gala, with $75 per plate filet mignon steaks in front of our top donors, filet mignon steaks in front of their top donors, the cast did in fact sing both of those songs. And there were gentlemen and ladies in lovely dresses and green faces leaving the ballroom. Have a little priest. What is that? It's fop, finest in the shop. And we have some shepherd's pie peppered with actual shepherd on top. Thank you, Jessica Cloud. That's a good story. All credit to her. You can find her on LinkedIn. And then this one also, I saw, this is a story that Duke Haddad, I hope I pronounced your name correctly, Duke, who's an educational doctorate, from what he has called his 13 fundraising horror stories published in Nonprofit Pro. And he writes a story that I've decided to title Hold Your Temper, because I like to give a clue, even if it's the wrong one. I was in charge of a 500-person nonprofit event dinner at a fancy club. Literally 5 minutes before the reception was to end and everyone was to come into the dinner room, glass began to explode at every table. The candles were covered by non-tempered glass. I was flying to each table, grabbing the glass centerpieces before they exploded, and luckily only a third of the glasses exploded. And with a slight delay, few people knew what had happened. I sure hope so. If a glass breaks in our house, we must spend 3 hours vacuuming because we're afraid of a piece of glass. Anyway, I love this story, Duke. It sounds terrifying. But yeah, one more thing to plan for if you're doing a special event. Please either don't put your glasses over live fire or make sure you have the right kind. Yeah, that's something else. Okay. So how about some general hair-raising fundraising practices? And I promise I'm going to share your stories too. I just want to get through some of these that have been shared with me previously. So don't get mad. Don't go away. I'm going to read you some titles. You tell me which one first. Just a few final pledges. Remembering the really important donors. Redhead executives. That's it. That's it. Just the three. I pared this down. So, okay, redhead. Wow. Oh, wow. This is okay. So I don't know what's going on here. If I could turn on the cameras, we might find there are a lot of redheads in the room, or I don't know. And then I'll do that, and then I'll do the really important donors. Okay, redhead executives. This is a throwback a little bit. Okay, we have to try and peel back the winds of time to imagine this happening. And this happened to a researcher. It's not uncommon, so you can update this to 21st century characteristics. But here we go. The president's office called at the end of the day, already something that could happen today. The president's office called at the end of the day with an urgent request that needed to be completed in about 30 minutes. I think we can end right there. That alone caused my heart to start racing. But they then asked for a background on an executive from a very large corporation who may have retired within the last 10 to 15 years. The other detail that they could provide, the only other detail that they provided, was that this retired executive may have had red hair. That's it. No name, no address, no affiliation with our institution. So this is what they did. I found old copies of our annual reports in our files. Since the photos were in black and white, I essentially guessed among them who had red hair, narrowed it down, checked back with the president's office to see if the name rang a bell. And fortunately, it was the person the president was trying to remember from his meeting years earlier, all in 30 minutes. You know, if the whole punchline of this whole session was hire a researcher, I think you've just heard why. So that's redheaded executives. Now, I like this story. This is something that a lot of our institutions do. And maybe we do it just as badly sometimes. Remembering the really important donors. Well, it's more of a nightmare phone-a-thon story than a horror story. The freshman caller who has a donor on the phone and is working on renewing his gift. Then the donor says, "Hey, I hear a lot of noise and bells in the background. Is that all the other students calling alumni like me?" The student says, "Yes, sir. We've got a lot of callers here, and we're ringing a bell every time we get a pledge." And then, not sensing he ought to leave well enough alone, the caller continues, "But you should have been on the phone last week." And the donor asks, "Oh, why?" And the student caller says, "It was a lot noisier last week because that's when we called all of our really important donors." Okay, so there we go. Hey, student caller, give them a break, right? Yeah. You all have student callers? If not, just make sure they know what to say. All right. Now, this is one from two, actually, from the donor's perspective. One I received today, anonymously, and there are a whole bunch of little nuggets in here. So I'm sharing it verbatim, but without attribution. And I want to tell you, this is a person who knows their stuff. So if you have heard until you're just tired of hearing it about how we don't treat our donors right, we don't, not all the time anyway. And there are some simple things we can do to change that. These are examples of what not to do. One story, what I'd call a charity mugging at church, literally going into a service, seeing a fellow parishioner who is also ran a nonprofit and being asked, "Why haven't you given us money?" Obviously not something you want to do. Oh, I love these emoji down here. Thank you, Amanda and Ashley. That's exactly my reaction too. Here, and there are several of these. Or the letter that landed in my desk asking for $50,000 for an event next week from an organization I'd had no contact with. Also very common. Or the "give us 50,000 and we'll give you a board seat" situation. Yes. So lots of scary stuff. Not to mention the multi-million-dollar proposal that came out of the blue. Someone didn't do any research there, expected it to be a low six figures. And then one thing that this person, who is a very experienced donor, institutional donor, said bothered them was that when they had officially said no to a request for support as the person responsible for that activity at that institution, then the organization found another executive to say yes, playing the one against the other. Now, this person didn't share what they thought about that beyond making this comment. But of course, I feel the fear, right? Because if you've done that, you've played one person against another in a grant making institution, how do you think that's going to work out the next time around? Or this one's even worse: going through a teenager, a child, or an employee to get to a parent, an executive at the company, to get a commitment that was something the company wouldn't usually support by playing favorites. And finally, this one, which they described as being basic but happening all the time, making a commitment or a gift and being really proud, being thanked once, but then not stewarded. And this is the thing I hear more about than anything else in our field. Having to remind the organization that some stewardship of a multi-year gift is needed. And no, it's not time to ask again. Basically, to just treat people as human beings. So I want to really thank the person for sharing that. And there's another one that I just saw that was really remarkable. And I'm going to label this one. It didn't have a title either. But it comes from the Ethical Dilemmas in Fundraising, the AFP guide and resource that's been published this month for Ethics Month. And it says it's been described as scholarships not following donor intent. Now, there's a lot of discussion in our field, for good reason, about how donor intent sometimes is restrictive, and it forces us to do all these things. And we ought to consider the community and not be slavish to the donors and all this stuff. There's an important and informed conversation on this. However, there's another point of view. And that point of view is really well described in this story. And it's especially important when we're talking about not just the living, who sometimes can speak up pretty well for themselves if they're giving money, but the dead, who no longer have a voice. And now we're responsible for the contract we have with them, not just the legal one, but the moral one we have with them when they pass. I worked for a community college foundation where I was responsible for entering gifts for scholarships, including endowment payments from our local community foundation for scholarships. The gift and bequest agreements were kept on file and specifically outlined how the payments were to be used. I had not worked there very long when I noticed that it appeared the payments were not going towards the scholarships intended by the donors, even considering administrative costs. I thought it was just a clerical error, but when I asked the management, including the executive director, about it, they seemed very uneasy about my questions. It was not accusatory at all. The bookkeeper started crying. I reached out to colleagues who said that my choice was to call the DA or to quit. And I chose to quit because I didn't want to negatively affect the organization's ability to raise funds for and grant scholarships in our community. Bad press would have been devastating for the organization. Now there's new leadership at the College Foundation, and I believe it's been resolved by that new leadership. There are so many scars in this little story, one of which is a person who wanted to do the right thing, but in order to do the right thing, she thought she would injure the organization that the donor and the community needed. There's a way we can avoid this. It's just by doing the right thing in the first place, never putting our staff or our donors in that position. And then, let me see. Okay, so how's this going? Am I giving you too much, too little? Are these stories relevant to you? And Tony just said something here, which is a major case in this category is Robertson versus Columbia University, and Doug White wrote a book on the case. Absolutely. Thank you, Tony. And by the way, I've referenced Tony a couple times in this friendly way, but let me just tip my non-existent penguin hat to him, because Tony runs the nonprofit radio, and his work is phenomenal. He does exceptional interviews. He's done hundreds upon hundreds of them, and really helps to have us engage on the major issues of the day with really brilliant people. So my thanks to Tony for hanging out here. So I've got a couple of things here under the category of sexual harassment. And these two stories are before Me Too. Now, why even talk about something that seems so old? I think we have to remind ourselves of why we've had this conversation about Me Too. Because I think one part of the undercurrent of all this is that we forget things. It's very easy to forget about Jeffrey Epstein. In 10 years, if you talk to a newly minted fundraiser, grant maker, neighbor, friend, and you say Jeffrey Epstein, they may not know who you're talking about. They certainly don't remember names like, William Aramone. Our memories are very short. I can easily imagine a scenario in which we start to give way to some of the lessons learned. Of course, lots of things happen with this discussion about sexual harassment and all of its forms, and sexual abuse, and all forms of this kind of power interplay, this inappropriate use of power. But these two stories are interesting, I think, if only because they kind of crystallize some of the discussions, and from two different gender perspectives, I might add. And once again, they're first person. So I find it interesting because the stories don't necessarily come out the way or they aren't described the way we initially anticipate. And rather than judging them, I just like to share them and let you draw your own conclusions about how you feel about them, how you feel about the outcomes, and the attitudes expressed in them. So the first one, I just decided to call Hush. Doesn't have a title. And Elise, will a copy of this be available? A recording of this will be. And so, yes, absolutely, along with all the others in the series. And Jack will put a note in there about that. But the stories themselves are ones I'm always updating. So I don't have this as a book. I guess I could create one. So if there's demand for that, let me know. So the first one I'll call Hush. And this is a story which is also from that new AFP Guide and Resources series. And this one's called Sexual Harassment from a Prospect. And we've heard other stories about this just in the last couple of years that are finally coming to the fore. This is just one. An employee of mine told me she was feeling uncomfortably harassed by a new potential large donor she had visited, but still viewed as an excellent prospect. I asked if she would like to have me take over the solicitation with all the financial credit for any subsequent gifts being credited to her for having found and nurtured the relationship. She thanked me, but said she'd still like to work on it. I said, okay, as long as she felt she could manage it safely. As it happened, she left the company shortly after that for a new position in another state. As mentioned, it didn't get to be solved because the employee left. This was just before the Me Too awareness movement happened. And I've since wondered if I should have instead contacted the potential donor directly to tell him his advances were completely inappropriate and been prepared for him to either apologize to her or to simply withdraw his potential support, since we wouldn't have wanted it at that point. I learned more about the need to call out bad behavior through Me Too. So there are different ways that people are reacting to these stories, thinking back to what they did or didn't do, but also what should or should not happen in the future, what we are or not willing to tolerate, what the general understanding of these issues is. Here's another one. It's very different. And this is, again, first person from someone else's storybook. Oh my gosh. I have to read it to you, but I have it later. Whoops. Okay, I promise you will. Oh no, here it is. Meet me out back. Obviously, from a male perspective, I'm not saying it represents all male perspectives, okay? I'm not sure if this is a horror story or the opposite. A former colleague was working for a charity in Massachusetts and had an appointment with his campaign chair for a one-on-one meeting for planning. She had told him she might be outside. Bob arrived, knocked on the door. No answer. He went around back as previously directed and found her sitting on a chase lounge by her pool. He sat down in a chair beside her as indicated and began their chat. Oh, by the way, did I mention that she was stark naked? The campaign chair was very attractive. The person's words, okay. And Bob worked hard to keep his eyes fixed on her eyes during the entire conversation. True story. There's a lot that we'll have to unpack as we make our way through this, but obviously we need to have those things in our policies too, not just for our donors, but for our staffs. And then we have confidentiality. So what's in here? Lots. And I'm going to just actually go past a number of these stories to the one that's the scariest of all. This should not be able to happen now. But there may be loopholes in our data today and the way we deal with information and share with one another that still make us vulnerable. So I'm going to read a story that seems very much of the past, but we can still learn from, I think, for the future. While at the University of XYZ, the head of records came into work early one morning. He noticed, oh, whoops, sorry, wrong one. Oh, there we go. Sorry about that. I'll call it the stalker. It was the start of term and things were swamped with people registering for classes. A young man came to the window inquiring about a student for whom he had a social security number, saying he needed to deliver an urgent family message. My colleague made the rushed decision that knowing the SS number was sufficient confirmation of relationship. She confirmed the student was enrolled, but had changed her name and handed him the easiest printout that she could get, which was a form that included not only the student's class schedule and her new name, but also her home phone number and address. The next day, we read in the paper that the student had been murdered. The young man turned out to be an abusive former boyfriend who had been trying to find her for 6 months. She had changed schools, her name, made sure all her information was ex-directory. These privacy issues are serious. And while it seems like, a lot of this stuff never takes that big of a leap, I do think that there is an opportunity within each of these stories to teach us something that could prevent it from being like this or like the Jeffrey Epsteins of the world. And so maybe we have a few in our chat. So let me see if I can go back. Oh my gosh. And try to grab a few of these with you. So Jack, you can even help me. if you see anything in there that you think I can grab a piece of. And the last one I remember was back to Iska's about the profile and the purse. So I'm going to go ahead and see if we see something else. So I'm going to read these without attribution unless somebody tells me to attribute. This is a one from one of the people here in our little group today, saying a previous CEO at a former nonprofit I worked for made our top donor stop giving for 2 years. The donor was a private and anonymous person who we finally got to attend an event just once. The CEO was so excited to see the donor that the CEO went up and cold turkey started listing off all the things the CEO knew about this organization, such as about this donor, such as their education background, family demographics, and other personal things. The donor was visibly uncomfortable at the intrusion and stopped donating for 2 years. Yeah, I can imagine that. We've got to be thoughtful about what we convey, not because even if it's public, sounds like some of that information obviously would have been, that doesn't mean people need to hear it. What they need to know is that we're listening to them, we care about them, not that we need to know, when they graduated from college and how much money they make. That's not it, obviously. Let me take a look here and see if we have any other fun ones. And let me see. Okay. CO no. A previous CEO at a former nonprofit. Oh, that's the same one. Sorry. I was about to share that again. It is good, but I don't think I need to read it to you twice. Let me see. We have one here that says, again, I won't attribute it, but not sure if this is the right place to share this, but that last story reminded me of our own. We had an annual donor thank you event that was black tie and very professional. The person who was supposed to secure entertainment decided to hire puke and snot. I've never said those words in the series before. The person who was supposed to secure entertainment decided to hire Puke and Snot, the Renaissance Festival comedy duo. If you don't know Puke and Snot, they're very raunchy. Sounds right. Multiple major donors walked out. Yeah, okay. Well, I will not be hiring Puke and Snot anytime soon. Although maybe, Jack, maybe we should get them to come to the series and talk with them. Kind of interesting, actually. Oh, that's kind of an interesting footnote here. Just who Anna had said this to the group. Just I don't even use the term major donors outside my colleagues, and that seems like it's beyond the scope of what we're talking about. But I don't think it is. I think that's a great comment because, in part, we have to think about policies and procedures, and those policies have a lot to do with not just how we maintain data and all these things, but also how we treat people, and sort of like the guidance we got from a donor in this presentation. The same thing with, how do people want to be thought of? How do they want to be held in our hearts? And it's very important. And let me see. And I'm looking to see if there's anything else. And, okay, we do have one. A truly horrifying experience. After we put out normal publicity celebrating the hire of and I'm just reading the content, okay, of our Black non-binary intern, we had to deal with online anonymous trolls as well as bigots who were perfectly happy sharing their opinions publicly. Frightful and ghastly indeed. It wasn't scary for our fundraising, though, as we know when we live our values and we support supporters who share them. I want to really thank you for writing that. And comment that I completely respect your privacy and doing it anonymously, but it does speak to the time that we're in, that we have to convey a story like that anonymously. Let me see if we have any others here. And I think we're coming through. Oh, here we go. Here's another one. I had a donor to my area who gave her gift anonymously to the athletic department. One of the benefits was a parking space for games. They spray painted the parking stops with the name of the donor. They painted anonymous on the stops, and then the donor was instructed to park there. Guess it wasn't so anonymous after they parked there. They were not pleased. Yeah, I guess that kind of defeated the purpose. Although if they had vanity plates, maybe we could have questioned whether they really wanted to be anonymous or not. But Sorry, my commentary. And then recently, here's another one. Recently, someone I know made a gift and came back laughing that there was a plaque to thank funders and their names were misspelled. Oh, it's like the Molly and the dog thing. Their organization put an apostrophe in their last name, which isn't how they spell their name. Never prior to the plaque, the organization had misspelled their name. And the development director got wind of this a few days later. The donor thought it was hilarious and apologized and shared that it would be fixed. What I would say about all these stories is different as they are. Not only is there a general moral to it, to make sure that we've got policies and procedures in place and follow them, but maybe even more that there are some things that we can, if we need to, we can talk about internally to keep people constantly focused on the right things and observing the policies that support those right things. And let me just give you a few examples of things that I run into as a consultant over the last few years that really surprised me. Sometimes they just proved that I can become oblivious or ignorant of these things. And so I'll shout out a few questions to you that you can consider and think about as maybe discussion pieces in your own organizations. One is, are you registered everywhere? I run into so many organizations which are not actually registered charitable organizations in all the states that require it. That seems like an obvious thing, but it isn't to many people. Here's another one. We talked about events earlier. How about, do you deduct the value of those stewardship events? Do you deduct the value when you're thinking about, the tax deductibility? That's something I'm sure Tony could talk about for half an hour easily. Another one would be, would you pay a commission to a consultant for a major gift? This seems like a no-brainer, right? Because the AFP policies, the AFP, ethics principles. But in fact, I've worked with organizations where they tried to employ this, and or they have done so in the past, or they thought about doing so in the future, about paying commissions. So it's a real thing out there. Here's another one. Do you all follow a gift acceptance policy? Something that would avoid, for example, the kind of potential risk of the Jeffrey Epstein example. But it may be something more like what the World Health Organization has employed for a long time, which is to say, we're the World Health Organization. Therefore, we don't take money from, let's say, just for example, tobacco companies. That seems kind of obvious, but they have codified it. Are you conducting due diligence on donors and the sources of their gifts? That's where research and fundraising come together. And we think about, in advance of just sending proposals everywhere, only talking to the organizations and individuals who not only aligned with us on our values, but in their lives are aligned with us. So we don't end up thinking 10 years later, do we need to take a name off a building? As the most amazing story of our time has reflected. And that's with the Sacklers and the opioid crisis. So there are lots of things here that you can unpack and discuss, but I just want to make sure we put up some of those into kind of practical considerations as you walk away from some of this and think, well, what does it mean to me? And how can we make sure that it's relevant to the rest of the people in my office? I hope this has been fun for you. It certainly has been a lot of fun for me. I do this, again, every year, sometimes with friends. We've done it with Brian Saber and others in the past, sometimes at conferences where we can involve others. I'm sorry we couldn't see your faces and hear your voices today. We will try to employ that functionality in the future and do more of a call-in kind of variety show here. But I want to thank you so much for doing what you do, and also for keeping these kinds of stories top of mind. Sometimes to poke a little fun at what we do wrong unintentionally, but also to keep us on the straight and narrow and do the right things for ourselves, our donors, and our communities. It's always a blast to do that here in the Philanthropy Mastermind series, brought to you, of course, by our friends at DonorSearch, a company that I'm so glad to work with, not just because they've sponsored the series, but also because they too are a really good, ethical bunch. If you want to learn more about them, I know I didn't talk about them today, you can do that by looking at the little link you're going to see as we close out today. So I would encourage you to do that. And while you're there, you can see all these sessions, including this one, a recording of it. You can share it with your colleagues. So until next time, thanks so much for hanging out, and go out there and have a little fun. It's Halloween, folks.